This week on Head to Head, we have two British heavyweights packing 12-cylinder engines with well over 500 horsepower and price tags near $300,000. They both have wonderful names too, the Aston Martin Vanquish and the Bentley Continental GT Speed. The question is, which one's better? On this episode, we find out. The Aston Martin Vanquish. My favorite part about this car is walking up to it because you just get to admire its design, the shape, the lines. It's very beautiful, especially in this blue color we have here. Then firing it up is also really nice. The way this V12 sounds is just intoxicating. It builds to just this sweet oral satisfaction that makes you want to explore the power band a bit more. You notice though, when you leave it in manual mode, even when you're in sport mode, the transmission's a little lazy. Shifts happen way too slow, and there's this tendency for the transmission to always want to stay in a gear that's too high. So you never get to explore the upper ranges of the power band. That's unfortunate for two reasons. One, it backs you out of the sound. You don't get to hear the engine. Two, you also don't get peak horsepower. Peak horsepower happens near 7,000 RPM in this car. And the torque peak is actually not that great considering the segment that this car is in. It has under 500 pound-feet of torque. Still, it reaches 60 miles an hour in 4 seconds flat and passes the quarter mile in 12.3 seconds at 116.2 miles an hour. Big carbon ceramics halt the Vanquish in 104 feet. So the car can feel kind of lazy in that regard, and that laziness is not what you expect when you hear it idle by. You think, yeah, supercar. This car is a very enjoyable, traditional rear-wheel drive chassis setup and behavior. I like the weight of the steering, I like the feedback through it, but I don't feel like I have a connection to the front end. It feels slightly ropey. I know this car's lateral limits are high, and I know it defaults to a mild understeer at the test track. But I never feel like I can safely approach those limits here on the road. If you back away from the limits, if you back away from pushing it and keep it at 7/10, it's a lot more satisfying. You can enjoy the sweetness of the engine a little bit more, the balance of the car a bit more, and it also helps you position the car on the road a bit more. This is a very big car. It's a very long car, and it can feel just slightly bigger than the road when you start going fast. The ride is firmer than I would expect for a Grand Touring car, and that's what this is. Consider the way it wants to be driven slowly. You'd expect that the ride would be a little bit more controlled, and it's not. You get a lot of noise through the suspension, as in frequency in the ride. You feel a lot of vibration and bumps, and it can kind of move the car around. I also really lament the fact that this car still does not have a red line. If you have a car with this kind of horsepower that can be driven fast, you need a red line. The gear display on the center will turn red when you approach red line, but it doesn't give you enough time to actually execute an upshift because the shifts happen way too slowly. Another little annoyance is the fact that this engine actually displaces 5.9 liters, and yet they still keep saying it's 6 liters. There's just a dishonesty to that I really find annoying. The trunk and its integrated spoiler, it's all carbon fiber. All the body panels are carbon fiber, but it takes something like 3 days to build that trunk. The construction of the Aston Martin is something you have to admire. It takes them something like 70 hours to build the interior. They take 7 cowhides to put this together. The blue stitching matches the paint very nicely. These leather seats have a very stylized quilt to them. But the seat controls are in a bad position because I accidentally just moved myself forward while taking a corner. The The interior is very nicely put together with the exception of a few issues that we've noticed on this car. The seam here is kind of separating, and the panel on the passenger side that covers the airbag is about half an inch higher than it should be, which is kind of worrying. We also have haptic controllers, this sort of glass-faced control switch here. You press it and it's not actually a button. You get this little vibration, but sometimes it doesn't work. And when you're driving up a mountain road, you don't always have the concentration to hit one of those buttons as clearly, as quickly as the button wants to be hit. That is a very nice sound. This Continental GT Speed, in a word, is bizarre. The seating position is far more upright. You feel closer to the front axle in the Vanquish. I say weird because it is a Bentley. This is all-wheel drive. It weighs over 5,000 pounds. This has, I believe, undefeatable stability control, and those are all bad things. Those are things you don't want in a driver's car, and yet this car works. I'm finding that I can push this car a little bit harder when you drive it quickly. That may be because its lateral limits are lower, but the speed certainly isn't. And given this car's name, that seems appropriate. 60 mile an hour arrives in 3.8 seconds. And the quarter passes in 12.1 seconds at 117.1 miles an hour. These carbon ceramics stop the Bentley in 111 feet. I feel this car load up in a way that speaks more clearly than the Vanquish. There's more precision in the steering wheel and more feedback coming through. I can stay on this car's limits a lot easier, and I'm more comfortable doing it. This car to me is like a power lifter. It weighs a lot, but it also has a precision necessary for driving fast. There's something in the absolute strength, but also the precision it gives you too. And then there's also the satisfaction of cruising in a Bentley. Sure, the Aston Martin will give you more attention from a crowd, but this is the big, imposing bruiser. There's just still an aura of luxury despite all the performance you get. Now there is understeer, you get understeer. This car isn't going to drift like the Vanquish, and oh Lord, does the Vanquish drift very well. This is a Bentley. You don't drive these things fast. The fact that you can is nice. There are still some quirks, like when you lift off the throttle when you're entering a braking zone, there's a bit of engine overrun, which leaves a little bit more acceleration than you anticipate. It's kind of unnerving the first time you do it. There's another downside, and that's these shifters are a little bit too far away from your fingers, so you can't really use them when you're driving hard. But fortunately, there's so much torque that you can drive it plenty fast in automatic. You just rely on the boost to come in and ride that through a corner. One of the things I'm disappointed though about this Bentley is there is no engine sound. You just look at the tach and it's sort of doing this, and you can't really tell what speed you're going other than the sensation of torque pressing you into your seat. But beyond that initial satisfaction out of pushing a Bentley hard, you find a car that has a lot of quality to it as well. This interior, for example, is just vivid and lush and very nice to sit in. I like the way all the gauges work. I like the controls, even these fan controls here. There's just sort of a classical quality to everything in this car. The only downside is you notice there's quite a bit of stuff borrowed from the Volkswagen product group. I can live with that though. What's puzzling about this pairing is that this Bentley costs about 50 grand less than the Vanquish as they're optioned. I think Johnny Lieberman said it many times that quantity has a quality of its own. That's a line that I think Stalin used or something. But it's true. This car has more of everything. It is substantially heavier. It has all-wheel drive, so there's double the drive wheels. Look at the windows, for crying out loud. They have double panes, so it's really quiet in here. I'm enjoying driving it more along the road. It has more charisma, it has more personality, and my butt says this is faster around corners than the Vanquish. I can't account for that price discrepancy. Is the sound of the Vanquish worth $50,000? Maybe if you can get it on vinyl. The Aston Martin Vanquish is a nice driving, good-looking, and fabulous sounding car. But ultimately, the bulk of its traits are best enjoyed when it's parked. The Bentley Continental GT Speed, despite being all-wheel drive and way too heavy, is the car I want to keep driving. And for that reason, it wins this episode of Head to Head.